All right, so hi everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you to today's virtual USA Gap Year Fairs. We're thrilled to be hosting you this afternoon. Just a quick reminder before we get started, this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with registered participants. The provider info sessions following the webinar, however, are not recorded. So definitely be sure to check those out so you don't miss any important content. Thanks, Tyler. Well, thank you again all for joining us live and coming prepared with questions today. I'm super excited for what we have in store today. And I just wanted to take a really quick minute to introduce myself so you know who's speaking at you. I'm Drew Beasley. I'm the Outreach and Events Intern for USA Gap Year Fairs and Go Overseas. You'll see in some of these photos here that I've taken a gap year myself in Indonesia. I've studied abroad in Italy, and I've led summer programs in Yellowstone, you name it. So needless to say, gap years and international education is something I'm really passionate about. And I'm thrilled more than anything to be here today to help you achieve the gap year adventure of your dreams. My fantastic colleague, Tyler Janae, is joining us as well as helping out behind the scenes, dropping links throughout this webinar and monitoring the Q&A. Thank you so much, Tyler. So this event is hosted by Go Overseas, which you can think of as Yelp, but for meaningful travel. On gooverseas.com, you can browse programs, read verified alumni review, and explore other resources such as articles, guides, and scholarships. If you're inspired today to take the leap and start planning your gap year, this is a great place to do your research and find your best fit program. And before we really dive into the afternoon's core programming, just a quick overview of what to expect today. We'll start off the event with our Gap Year 101 webinar given by the Gap Year consultant extraordinaire, Julia Rogers of Enroute Consulting. Then you'll get to interact with Gap Year program providers during the actual virtual fair. And Julia and I will be in the Ask an Expert Center throughout in any case you have any questions or you want to continue the Gap Year 101 conversation. So speaking of the Help Center, something that I wanted to highlight, which will be your best friend throughout the entire virtual fair, is the Attendee Hub, which we're dropping a link to right now. And please, please, please bookmark this page because this is going to be your home base for the entire virtual fair experience. You'll use the Zoom links inside the hub to access providers, info session, and Q&As. If you ever lose your hub link, you can find it in your Zoom reminder emails for this event. Now, before I introduce our amazing speaker for the evening, I wanted to take a quick moment to share a few super helpful gap links for you all to check out during or after the event. First up, the USA Gap Year Fairs landing page. And do I have some exciting news to announce here? Go Overseas and USA Gap Year Fairs is excited to announce that we'll be giving away $5,000 in gap year funding this year through our 2022 Gap Year Scholarship. It takes less than 2 minutes to start your application, so I'm going to encourage all 20 of you on here who meet the eligibility criteria to go ahead and start your application now. You're 3 steps away from winning $5,000. And now our GapMatcher tool. And you guys, I am so excited about this one. I personally think it's the coolest thing and such a great resource for today. So the GapMatcher is the official USA Gap Year Fairs search tool designated to generate a list of personalized gap year program suggestions based on you. If you still aren't quite sure which programs you'll be checking out during the fair, I invite you to actually take the GapMatcher now to get your own customized list of programs to visit today. Next up, survey time. And definitely pay attention here because it's a fun one. Here at USA Gap Year Fairs, we're always looking to improve our content and make gap year information as accessible as possible. So that being the case, we'd love to hear about your experience today. If you complete this quick survey within 24 hours of the event, you'll be entered for a chance to win $250. It's that simple. So with that, I'm finally going to go ahead and pass the mic over to who you've all been so patiently waiting for, our wonderful gap year consultant, Julia Rogers at Enroute Consulting. Julia is the founder of Enroute Consulting, is accredited by the Gap Year Association as an expert gap year counselor, and has more than a decade of gap year advising under her belt. We are so lucky to have her here with us today. And before Julia dives into it, I just wanted to remind everyone of that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit questions as you think of them, and we'll answer them at the end of the event. So without further ado, Julia, take it away.
Thank you so much, Drew. And thank you, Tyler, too. It's really nice to meet a new member of the Go Overseas team as well. So, and thank you all out there for deciding to spend some of your weekend with us here today. I'm going to try and make this presentation as entertaining and informative as possible. I think that the nice thing is that I have the topic on my side. Gap years are so exciting and so dynamic to think about that we'll have no trouble at all. Hopefully giving you some good information that is applicable to wherever you are in the gap year planning process, and also answer questions, like Drew said at the end too, for anybody who has specific questions before we release you into the fair. So like Drew said, I've been gap year counseling for basically my whole career. It is over a decade, but actually now it's been more than 14 years of gap year consulting. So it's something that I'm truly passionate about. I took a gap year myself after college. I spent almost a year in Tanzania doing public health outreach, which is the top square or the top image in this slide. And then since then, I have done dozens of site visits to different gap year programs all over the world. I've taken a sabbatical with my husband. I've taken mini sabbaticals with my kids. And I'm just very, very passionate about experiential education and the gap year option in general. So Tyler, welcome to advance the slide. One thing that I want to start us all with today is anchoring us in a shared language around what a gap year is. A lot of people come to these presentations with maybe some preconceived notions, maybe some knowledge of it from the people around you who may have taken it or may have been considering a gap year. Here's the definition that I think is most useful. A gap year is a structured period of personal growth aided by activities of enrichment. And furthermore, it's an extended period of experiential learning taken in order to deepen one's personal, practical, and professional awareness. And those 3 Ps are going to come back to us later when it comes to the planning process. But you notice in this definition that there are guardrails here. It's really important for people to know that a gap year is an intentional choice. It is not the absence of a choice. If you know someone in your life who graduated high school, didn't go to college, didn't get a job, and said that they were on a gap year, well, guess what? Like, that's not a gap year. A gap year is an active decision that you make to say, I want to take control over my future. I want to learn things. I want to grow. I want to see new things and meet new people. And I have some specific intentions behind this period of time. Beyond that, the gap year is the most personalized form of education you could ever hope for, because there are programs and opportunities to self-design your own gap year that can suit any budget, any geographic location, and a myriad of different personal goals that you might have for yourself. So one other thing that I think is really important in this process is to hear from voices of students themselves. And because of the time constraints on this presentation, it's only me talking to you, but I wanted to include a short clip from a gap year alum named Jonah. So I'm going to be quiet so you can hear that. Oh no, it's good. It's good. It's good. Go for it, Tyler. So you can hear this and we'll talk about it.
I want to give advice to someone who was thinking about taking a gap year. I would say you're at an incredible time in your life. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. The only person who knows what they want out of your future is you. So follow your gut, follow what your heart's telling you to do, and just give yourself time to be young, explore, go on adventures. My gap time makes me feel like the richest person on the planet. Trust me, you won't regret it.
So one of the reasons why I think it's so important to play that clip is because, if you're a student on this presentation today, maybe a parent encouraged you to come and watch it, or maybe you've wanted to take a gap year for a really long time. But either way, you're probably feeling a little bit of tension in this decision. And that's because a gap year is still not the most common choice, but it is exploding in popularity over the past few years, especially as a result of the pandemic. And I think that one thing I really want every young person who's tuning in on this call to understand is that there's never in my 14-year career been a student who I've heard from or worked with who has regretted taking a gap year. And I think that's really, I want you to settle into that understanding, because even though a gap year can feel like a choice that not the people around you might not be making alongside you, it is a choice that many, many thousands and thousands of students are deciding to take every year. And you will find your people and your community if you take a gap year, and you will not feel left behind. You will actually feel like you are 5 steps ahead of your peer group. And we'll talk about why on the next slide, which is a little bit about gap year benefits. So these benefits, these statistics here are drawn from a gap year alumni survey that's done by the Gap Year Association every 5 years or so. And they poll alumni themselves. So this is self-determined data. 98% of gap year students say that their gap year allowed them to interact with people of other backgrounds and cultures. That could be through travel, but it's also about, if you're in your own community, busting out of the bubble that you grew up in and interacting with people that are outside of the people you already know. You don't have to go around the world to meet people that have different life stories and lived experiences. 98% of their gap year alums say that their gap year improved their maturity and confidence. This is, I think, amazing because it speaks to the personal development opportunities here that are unique to the gap year because it is so personalized and also encourages a lot of building of independence and self-determination. And then 82% of students say that their gap year actually gave them a professional advantage when applying to college or jobs. And a lot of this is because, gap year students are sometimes they're gaining actual career and professional experience through internships or working or job shadowing or many other things that you can do in a gap year, but they're also growing and learning about what they're good at, what they enjoy doing. And that information feeds into this virtuous cycle of having more intention and more understanding about what they want to do in college and beyond. And beyond this slide, we actually have data that shows that gap year students who intend to go to college, they overwhelmingly do attend college after their gap time. So you don't have to worry about someone falling off the track. And then once they do start college, they graduate sooner and with a higher GPA than traditional students. And that's drawn from studies done both at Middlebury and UNC Chapel Hill. So, there are a lot of really strong stats, but I think it's also important to marry those stats with the anecdotal knowledge that many of us have in this industry. And that is that, gap years are just really awesome. So, the other thing that I wanted to talk about with all of you today, and this is on the next slide, Tyler, is who takes a gap year. Because I think a lot of us, again, we're attaching a preconceived notion of gap years to maybe who we know who's done one or who we think takes gap time. So while I don't mean to boil people down into 6 categories, I think a lot of people might identify with some of these generalized profiles. So let me just tell you about why some of the people on this slide might decide to take a gap year. So we have, first of all, the worker. The worker is someone who typically has high GPA, high test score, high likelihood of academic burnout because they're really, really pushing themselves in high school. A lot of people who are in this category have also felt really an extra level of pressure because of college applications being more complicated during the pandemic and not being able to visit schools and that kind of thing. A gap year offers this type of student the opportunity to take a breather, feel refreshed, feel really excited about their college experience when they actually get there. And they often spend their time exploring their other areas of interest that may be either non-academic, or maybe they're exploring their academic interests in an experiential setting. So for example, someone who's interested in STEM or biology might go and work at a field station in Costa Rica and learn data collection techniques while studying frogs or something like that. So it allows them to kind of, again, experience the real world. Our meaning seeker is someone who tends to have high test scores when test scores were more of a thing. And but maybe their GPA doesn't match up to their not purpose behind, perform well in classes that they like, they teacher connection to them or their goals. Forget about it. They have a really hard time showing up and doing their best work in those settings. So for this type of student, a gap year can be an opportunity to, understand the forest for the trees. They might do some career exploration or just grow and mature. And then when they do start their higher education journey, they feel a little bit more intentional and settled and understanding about why you need to do these steps to get to where they want to go. Our floater is somebody who maybe doesn't really thrive in the classroom at all and struggles with maybe lack of motivation. Sometimes students here have, have other types of struggles that make classroom learning just not appealing to them at all. So a gap year for these students is an opportunity to learn in different ways, experience the world in different ways, and explore career paths that give them some knowledge about what happens next after their gap year, whether it's college or whether it's vocational school or whether it's community college or the military, any other very valid post-secondary path. Our pragmatist is a student who is usually on the hook for their college education. So they are invested in the financial implications of their college decision. And they want to know what they're doing there. They don't want to, switch majors and go to a college that they're not psyched on and those kinds of things. They want to be really, really intentional about their next decision-making process. So for these students, a lot of times their gap year is a time to gain that kind of clarity around what they want and take steps to make it happen. Sometimes these students are also taking a gap year to reapply for a different FAFSA package or different financial aid packages from colleges they want to go to. Our adventurer is someone who wants to take a bite out of the world, wants to break out, wants to see new things, meet new people, experience different opportunities in different places. So these people tend to have like the itchy feet, and they feel like they need to scratch them before they settle into whatever their post-secondary educational world is going to look like. And then lastly, we have the soul searcher. And the soul searcher is someone who maybe has had different challenges in the mental health or physical health realm that has created extra struggles in their high school experience. We do know that, especially because of the pandemic, many more students than even usual have experienced, mental health struggles. And a gap year is such an amazing opportunity for a wellness experience. And again, taking that stock, allowing a student to gain perspective, to develop their own toolbox of resources so that when they start college or any other post-secondary pathway, they are ready and they're well and they're feeling good. Okay, so I'm getting Drew, it said I froze for a second there. Do you need me to repeat anything?
Yes, you froze for a minute while talking about the meaning seeker. Could you just quickly go back over that one?
Sure. So our meaning seekers are ones that tend to have high test scores, and maybe their GPAs aren't always as high because they really need to understand their purpose. Anything that they do needs to be the foundational needs. They need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. So they may be the kind of student who does really well in a class with a teacher that they like or a subject that they like, but if it's something that they're not as psyched on, they may not show up in their best way. So a gap year for this type of student allows them to really understand the purpose of what they're doing next after high school, and show up in a better way, and also mature and kind of understand their goals and how to get there. So yeah, again, these are not perfect profiles, and you might see yourself in multiple settings or whatever. I think that it's more of a Venn diagram, but hopefully it's a little bit of an understanding of the different types of students who might engage with a gap year and why these different types of people can benefit from it. So a gap year is not just for one type of learner or one type of student. It can really serve many, many different types of young person. So next, let's talk a little bit about the planning process, because I know that a lot of the gap year planning process is a lot different than the college planning process, and here's why. If any of you on the call are engaged or have just finished the college planning process, then you're familiar with the idea that you're basically creating a profile of a young person, whether it's you or your son or daughter, and you're asking an institution to validate them by allowing them in. And that process is pretty fraught. It's stressful. It's judgmental by nature, and it leaves a lot of people with a sour taste in their mouth. A gap year, I'm not saying that college, once you get there, isn't amazing, but the college search process is pretty brutal. A gap year by design is a completely different process because it asks the student, what do you want to do? Where do you want to go? How do you want to grow? And guess what? Gap year opportunities are not competitive in the traditional sense. Most gap year opportunities have an admissions process that basically the biggest qualifier is, are you enthusiastic for the experience that we are offering as a company or as an organization? So it's everybody just like let your shoulders fall for a second and know that, like, if you decide to take a gap year, that the planning process is going to be so much more about what you want to do and making it happen than, can I do this? Are people going to let me do this? And kind of that permissive type of thing. So when it comes to actually planning your year, first of all, in the age of the pandemic and now a little bit more of global uncertainty geopolitically, it's important to frame your expectations. Like, nothing about a gap year is set in stone, and that's a good and bad thing, right? It requires people to be flexible and open-minded and adaptable, but it also means that you can weave and dodge as things happen and as things come up. And the gap year industry has become extremely adaptable in the face of the pandemic. Programs have been running since basically fall of 2020 is when most programs restarted after the initial kind of global shutdown, and have COVID protocols in place and have many other adaptability features within their framework of programming to be able to still run programming in the face of the pandemic, but also other factors as well. That being said, each program has their own health and safety protocols that we can kind of talk about later if you want to hear more. But for a student, you really want to start your planning process by, after you understand you need to be adaptable, setting some goals. And that's where that definition of the gap year comes back in. I advise that people come up with a few goals in each of the subcategories of that definition, which are personal goals, practical goals, and professional goals. And that's because you want to kind of hit a couple, you want to check different boxes over your year. The personal goals are the things you do for fun or for your own enrichment. The practical stuff are the adulting skills that you need to learn in order to be an adult. And then the professional stuff is the career exploration that helps you understand more about why you're doing your post-secondary path and what you need to accomplish to get to where you want to be. So then once you have your goals, it actually allows you to do a little bit more specific research, because a lot of people say they feel overwhelmed when they are starting their gap year planning process. So by having the goals and saying, oh, one of my goals is to learn French this year, and one of my goals is to get some marketing experience. I think I want to go into marketing. Then you can kind of tailor some of your search and some of your research to what you want to do. Then you want to hone it in and figure out what the right fit for you is. And then you start designing your gap year based on the opportunities that will help serve your personalized goals. And most people do multiple things over the course of their gap year. And they structure it so that it starts with more structured or programs with more mentorship and support, and moves towards more independent experiences. So for example, if you wanted to backpack through Southeast Asia and do an internship and do some sort of group program, you'd want to kind of reverse engineer that. You want to probably start with a group program that has a lot of structure and support, then do an internship, and then end your year with doing something really independent like backpacking or traveling on your own or with a friend. And lastly, again, bookending this with, again, stay flexible and understand how your goals might work in different settings. So even, again, when people weren't traveling as widely during this pandemic, people were still able to accomplish many of their gap year goals creatively. So next up is, thinking through the other factors for, your personal parameters as a family. Every family has different safety and health things that they need to keep in mind. Every family has different geographic preferences or limitations. Everybody's going to have their own goals, which we already talked about, and then your interests. One piece of advice I give all gap year students is to, we throw around passions a lot in this industry and in general in life. Adults are always telling young people, follow your passions, follow your passions. Well, guess what? That puts a lot of pressure on young people to have a passion. Not every young person has a passion or has discovered a passion or may ever have a passion. So my advice, and this is a totally stolen idea from author Elizabeth Gilbert, but she says, don't worry about following your passion, follow your curiosity. Everybody is curious about something. And if you don't know where to start with your gap year planning, start with what you're curious about and see where does that take you geographically? How does that suit your interests and goals? And then lastly, with health and safety, think about as a family, sit down, say, talk about, talk about where you want to go. Parents say, have an open conversation about your hard stops, and then come together with an understanding of what those parameters are together. All right, so next up, we get into the meat and potatoes of this presentation with a little bit of understanding about what are the actual categories of opportunities that you can do on a gap year. So one thing that I think is also important to understand is that, of these opportunities, there's 3 that are more structured and 3 that can be more self-designed or independent. So when it comes to programs, especially programs that you're going to see today at the fair, you're going to be seeing mostly experiential programs, volunteering and interning opportunities in this, vast array of options at the fair. But you don't have to do a program for the whole year or at all if you don't want to. You can also explore independent projects. You can travel on your own. You can do work, which includes working at home, destination work, where you can work in other places like a ski resort or even abroad, or work exchange, which is like where you're working in exchange for your room and board. If any of you have heard of woofing or work away, that's a great example of that kind of structure. So to give you a little bit of an idea of the parameter or the kind of like nuts and bolts of each of these, just to give you a little bit of sense of what might make sense for you. With experiential programs, and that's the bottom left there, that's the most common type of gap year program to start a gap year with if you want a structured program. They really range from ones that are more outdoorsy and focused on outdoor skills development to ones that are more culturally and language focused. So when you're thinking about what you want to do, know that there's a real array of things. Like if you want to learn how to backpack and rock climb and abseil and whitewater raft on your gap year, there is a program for you. If you want to do an intensive Spanish immersion experience where you're living with a homestay family, there's a program for you. And if you think that you want to do a little bit of everything, you're gonna know what I'm going to say. There's a program for you. Because some programs focus on, heavily on one side of that spectrum or the other, and others have more of a buffet experience where you get to do a lot of different things within a region. And experiential programs are also hallmarked by the presence of mentors and leaders. So leaders are there to manage the major logistics, teach leadership skills, and to also manage this, the group and social dynamic on a program, because these are going to be programs with 12 to 18 young people who are almost always gap year age specifically. So kind of 17 to 22 years old is usually a range on a gap year program, with the most concentration being on the kind of, 18, 19-year-olds. And you're going to have like people there, the leaders are usually in their mid to late 20s or a little bit older, and they're to help guide these students through their learning journey, which is just really comforting on many levels for the student themselves as well as the parents. And these programs take place all over the world, both in the States, in Europe, in Central and South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, and all of them are starting to become on offer, especially looking into this fall and beyond. So lots of geographic opportunity there. Now in volunteering, which is the one above it, there you can also find relatively structured opportunities where they have a staff on the ground. There's other people to meet, like you're with a group of people, but you might be focusing instead on community development projects or a teaching project or a conservation work, or even working with wildlife. And this, volunteer opportunities tend to be a little bit more flexible in length. You can choose how long you stay in a country or on a program, or you could choose to do national service, which is AmeriCorps programming, which is our domestic arm of the Peace Corps, which is open to high school graduates. There are many programs that you can do as an AmeriCorps volunteer. And interning is a great opportunity to develop professional development, obviously, skills and dip your toe into a career path. And there are internship programs that can actually provide you a peer group, place to live, and an internship placement, and they cost a little bit of money. Or you can, develop your own internship program by, utilizing your own, network of people that you might know, or your parents or your educators in your life might know, and find something to do and find something that's worth, where you can really get a sense of a career path that you're interested in. Now with independent projects, which is that middle one on the bottom, this is really this is like a playground for people who have an existing interest that they want to use their gap year dive deeper into. So this can mean writing your own play and producing it. This can mean taking a road trip. This can mean there were some students during the pandemic that decided they wanted to fish for every state fish in all 50 states. They had an Instagram handle, Fish All 50. That was amazing. And they did it. They spent their whole year fishing, and that was their own personal project they did. They funded it themselves. They were driving around themselves and locating the fishermen to take them out themselves. So if you have a meaty goal that you want to dig into in your life in general, this is the time to do it, right? Other people will record an album or take classes on the side to develop what they want to do when they get to school, that kind of thing. Lastly, traveling. Again, traveling doesn't necessarily mean far away from home, but it can and often does. But I've also had students, I had a student this year who bought a motorcycle, wanted to learn how to ride a motorcycle, and has been taking like small day trips and then is progressing slowly as he gets more comfortable with his bike to kind of doing overnight trips and learning how to do longer, experiences on his new bike that he bought himself. So those are opportunities that you can do, again, through collaboration with people in your life who know what they're doing, or slowly working up to it through a series of other types of programs. Okay, so I know that we probably have a lot of questions. So I'm going to quickly go through my last two slides, which are, first of all, how does explaining how a gap year works into your college experience, and how to think about applying or dealing with deferral in conjunction with applying to a four-year school. So first things first, I would say that prevailing wisdom is that if you know you want to go to a four-year college, the best route to take, the easiest route, I should say, is to apply to college senior year of high school. And the reason for this is that many colleges allow deferrals, meaning that they will hold your spot for a gap year. But, and then once your spot is held, it makes it a lot easier to just kind of enjoy your gap year if you're not applying to college on your gap year. So that's the route we're going to kind of talk about, but I'll also touch on what to do if you didn't apply to college on your gap year. So senior year, and I should back up even a little bit further. Junior year, when you're starting to research what schools you want to apply to, double check their deferral policies. Ask them when you go to a campus tour, or if you're on a virtual fair, or if you're at a physical fair, just say, hey, how do you guys feel about gap years? Do you allow deferrals? What's the process? You don't lose anything by saying that you're interested in a gap year. It's not going to hurt you, but it's also something that, it's good to know on your list, which ones you can take a gap year with. But let's assume that you apply with your other, high school seniors, you get accepted to some colleges, then you want to start asking for a formal deferral, which usually means you put down a deposit at your school of choice, and then you write a deferral letter, which basically says, here's why I want to take a gap year. Here's why I think it's going to make me an even better member of your campus community when I start school. And then you also want to check on your financial aid or any packages that you received through your school admissions process and see if they will defer along with you. With FAFSA, you will have to reapply on your gap year. So just keep that in mind. So while you're on your gap year, most colleges let you have your experience. Some have mid-year check-ins, which you'll know during your deferral process if they require that. And if you did not find your dream school, then on your gap year, you can reapply to schools, of course. So you do not want to reapply to schools if you have put down deposit in our promise to a school, though that's not considered ethical. So if you have not found your dream school, apply on your gap year. And then, after your gap year, you want to think about how to present your gap year on your resume, because it does look good and people have given people jobs because of their gap year experiences, for sure. And then you also want to reach out and develop your gap year community at college. Many colleges have gap year clubs, or sometimes the study abroad clubs will have like an arm for gap year students and things like that. And it's also, it's refreshing and nice to know that you will have a community to kind of find on campus after your gap time. It's very, very common for people now to have taken gap time, so it's not hard to find your fellow gappers. So if you do decide to apply to college on your gap year, my biggest advice is to still get as many transcript materials done in the summer after graduation as possible. That means letters of recommendation, getting your transcripts in order, letting your high school counselors know that you are applying to school the following year. And then when hopefully you'll do some cool things in the summer and fall of your gap year, so you can write about them in your personal statements when you apply to school, because that will set you apart. I'm not saying it'll help you get into a school that you wouldn't be qualified to go to, but it does add a little bit of extra flavor to an application, especially when people are reading a lot of the same types of essays. So use your gap year to your advantage. It does not hurt. It usually is either neutral or helps. So happy to say more about that if we have questions. But let's move on to the last slide, which is just a little bit of inspiration for you all. I think that, again, students are at the center of this experience, and it's really important to understand what they think and what they say about their experience. So I'm just going to allow everybody to kind of read some of these quotes. They're very inspiring. These are all real students of mine who I've worked with on their gap time, and then this is what they've told me at the end of their experiences. And all four of these people have very, very different gap years. Bailey worked at a performing arts program in England. Michelle immersed herself in Spanish language in Guatemala and Mexico and Peru. Jeremy had a political activism gap year where he worked with the Sunrise Movement, and James traveled basically backpacked across Europe, Asia, and Australia during his gap year. So a lot of different experiences, but they all kind of came away with these perspectives that are informing the rest of their life, which is very inspiring to me. And I think a lot of the people who are doing this work. So I think we'll probably have some questions. Do we have some questions going, Drew?
If you do have questions at the moment, you can go ahead and drop them down into the questions and answers. But it looks like just as we're finishing up, one question that I would love to bring up that a lot of people ask us is, Julia, what does it look like to fund a gap year? Are there opportunities to raise money for a gap year? Are there opportunities to do a gap year on a budget? What does that look like?
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Drew, because for time, it's always hard to kind of start chipping away at such a like big topic. And there is, I believe, in the Crash Course series, a whole hour-long session on how to fund your gap year that you can access on the Go Overseas and USA Gap Year Fairs page. So the thing to know about a gap year is that anybody can take a gap year for any amount of money, including if you need to have a cost positive gap year. So I want everybody on this call to come away from today knowing that you can take a gap year, no matter your budget. However, the more that you're able to invest in a gap year, the more opportunities that are going to be available to you. That's kind of the way it is. So I think that this is another important conversation to have around the kitchen table as a family when you're first starting to get into this process, because I think it's important for students to have some skin in the game, to understand how much, if at all, they are expected to raise or contribute to their gap year. And also for the families, how much do you have that you're willing to set aside for gap year programs or opportunities, or, every family kind of comes at it differently. Sometimes parents are willing to fund a gap year because they understand that it's an investment in the future education of their young person. So if you are the kind of young person or family who will benefit from some of these more expensive experiential education semesters, think of it as an investment. A lot of them also offer college credit, so you can use 529 money to pay for them. That is a little known fact, but there are routes to actually use 529 funds for many different types of gap year programs if they offer college credit. And then the other types of opportunities that still cost some money, but they're not as expensive, like volunteering or interning or travel-based programs, then you really want to think about, like, what do I most want to do? How do I prioritize those things I feel most strongly about, and how can I work towards making them happen? So for example, I have a student right now who I'm working with who sold his car to work with me, which was very heartening that he really wanted a partner in this planning process. So what we're doing together is he's going to be working for half his year to travel for half his year. And he's going to be he's doing destination work. So he's going to be working away from home at a really cool, like, lakeside resort that has dormitory housing on the side. We'll be doing that from the summer after graduation through the fall. So he's going to bank that along with some savings that he already has for his gap year. And the second half of his gap year is going to be low cost travel. So he's going to do a little bit of low grassroots volunteering in a country that he wants to go to, and then some backpacking travel after that. Maybe some work exchange too. We're kind of figuring that out. But that's an example of an international opportunity where it's half the year is working, half the year is travel. Another amazing opportunity that I touched on, but I have to highlight again, is National Service AmeriCorps, which could be City Year or NCCC or Public Allies. These are programs where you get a stipend for your national service while you're on your year, and then at the end of your service, you actually get an education award that you can use towards your higher education journey. So those are all other cost-effective ways of making gap year work.
Fantastic, Julia. Thank you for that. We've got one more question that I'm just going to quickly throw your way. We talked about this a little bit before we started today's session, but we've received a question from Shweta saying, I will be 17 as I graduate high school. Will this be a hindrance for getting into most programs, or do I have to wait until I'm 18 for most programs?
This is such a good question. So it really depends on the type of programming that you're hoping to do. For many of the more structured experiential education programs, especially ones that are based in the US, you can be 17 as long as you graduate high school and join those programs. And then other times, programs that are either based abroad or are a different type of structure, for example, internship programs or different types of volunteering programs, they legally require people to be 18 plus to volunteer. But that's, again, not always the case. So when you're looking on websites, a good thing to do would be to kind of hover over the program, drop-down menu and see if they have a section for under 18 volunteering. Because there are companies that do have the ability to do that. So another thing that is common for people who turn 18 on their gap year is to start with a more structured program that you can do, and then do those more independent things or travel further away once you turn 18 and don't have that hindrance. But I would say that you can definitely accomplish many things on your gap year, even if you're younger. In fact, that's often a reason that people take gap time, is that they know that they're a little bit younger for their grade. They want to use that time to their advantage. And then when you start school, you're kind of a little bit older, which is kind of cool.
Great point, Julia. With that, I think I will go on to our final announcement for the day before letting you all go into the rest of the Gap Year Fair. So if Tyler, if you want to go ahead, and perfect, you read my mind. All right, so thank you everyone for those awesome questions. And thank you, Julia, for the stupendous presentation. You're making me want to take a gap year now. If you do have
I
more
know
questions,
I know your game. You're going to be out traveling again very soon.
we will see, we will see. But if you do have more questions for Julia, you want to continue the conversation, jump into the Ask an Expert room, and Julia and myself will be there all day. Finally, I just want to circle back quickly to our recently launched USA Gap Year Fair Scholarship for anyone who might have joined late. This $5,000 Gap Time Scholarship opened just last week on March 1st, so I'd highly encourage anyone thinking about taking Gap Time to apply. It takes all 2 minutes to start your application, and the requirements are few and simple. Check out the link Tyler just dropped in the chat to learn more. All right, and my final reminder of the evening, which is to utilize your Attendee Hub. Tyler is dropping the link to that hub one more time into the chat. And again, you'll use the Zoom links in the hub to navigate to the info sessions and Q&As of our fantastic lineup of Gap Year program providers. And now, without further ado, it's time to kick off the fair. This is your chance to connect with program providers, so I recommend you unmute your mics and chat with the presenters. They're really looking forward to meeting with you. Thank you again so much for joining you, and I wish you a fabulous fair.